Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is wiggle. And this verb was requested by the viewer Artem in the Ukraine, who is an avid writer. So he's had some great ideas for new verbs to be discussed in these videos. So a special thank you to him. And just so that anybody who might be watching for the first time, I want you to know I really do welcome suggestions and your input. It's a lot of fun to think about verbs that interest you. So now with that, let's take a look at how we primarily use this verb wiggle. Generally, when someone uses the verb wiggle, they are talking about either moving or causing something to move, maybe up and down or from side to side. And the movements tend to be rather short or small, and they tend to be very rapid or quick. Okay, so we'll see some examples of this later, but the first example that came to my mind is actually in the context of an injury. So I hope you haven't had this experience, but maybe someone that you love or someone in your life has, where they possibly have hurt their hand, maybe their wrist or something, and to sort of test, like, can you move, right? I might hear a medical professional ask, can you wiggle your fingers, right? So they're wanting you to move, right? To see if there are other problems or injuries that might be impacting that movement. That's generally what we're talking about. And it doesn't just have to be fingers. It can really be any part of your body, but think side to side or up or down, really quick and rapid. For now, you should know that wiggle is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, you're going to drop the E and then add ing. That forms wiggling. The past tense and the participle forms of this verb can be made by just adding the letter D. Now, our base verb, wiggle, ends in an L sound. L sounds are voice sounds. So this means the ED ending is just going to make a D sound, and you're not going to add an extra syllable when you say it. So the past tense and the participle form of our verb should sound like this. Wiggled, wiggled. Okay. Now, I think you might encounter a particular phrasal verb, and I'd like for us to discuss that now. The thing I think you may run into is to hear someone wiggle out of. Okay. This particular phrasal verb can have two very different meanings. So the first goes back to our original definition. So you're sort of removing yourself from a particular place, maybe something that's kind of snug or tight-fitting, and you're twisting and contorting your body. So again, think of those kind of small, rapid movements. Let's take a look at an example of that in a sentence. How did your toddler wiggle her way out of the car seat? Right? So you might think car seat has these usually very snug straps, but somehow the child was able to free herself from it. Now, a second way to use wiggle out of is more of a metaphor, right? And it's to avoid something. And you're usually doing it in maybe a dishonest way, right? You're not just coming straight out and telling someone, listen, I don't want to do this. But you're looking for a way to get out of it. An example of this might be, don't wiggle your way out of doing your chores, right? So maybe a child is convincing his or her sibling, oh, don't you want to do this particular task? Or maybe tricking a younger sibling into doing the responsibility that is really theirs. Now, let's continue using our verb of the day, wiggle, and we'll practice it in a couple different ways. Today, I thought we would review the imperative and the past perfect. Let's start with the imperative. We use this verb tense to give a command. So in this verb tense, we're telling someone either to do something, so that's in the affirmative or in the positive, or if with a negative, to not do a particular action. And the imperative is rather unique in English. We do not have a stated subject. So it's implied. The subject is understood. It's either you, singular, if I'm speaking to one person, or it's you, plural, right? If I'm speaking to two or more people. So an example of an imperative sentence, again, think of that medical professional asking somebody or telling someone, wiggle your fingers, right? They're giving you that command, right? Can you make those small, rapid movements? Now, if you, and what you might notice there in the affirmative is I just begin with that base verb. So I'm not adding any special endings or suffixes to the verb. If you want to make a negative imperative, begin your sentence with do not and then the base verb. It's also pretty common in speech to hear the contraction. So do not becomes don't. An example of this would be, don't wiggle around while I'm putting sunscreen on you. I thought of this example, again, I think of that action wiggle many times with small children. And kind of the, I don't know if you've been around toddlers or spent much time around small children, but there's a lot of rapid, quick movements, right? And kind of that, I can't really sit still. I've gotta keep moving, okay? So you can imagine, right, maybe a parent trying to protect their child, right? And the child is making it difficult to get sunscreen in the right places. Now let's talk about sentences in the past perfect. We use this verb tense to talk about completed actions. But what makes it a little different than just the simple past tense is that we're really focusing on an action that occurred before a certain point in time or before another action. Let's take a look at an example sentence and we'll discuss the structure as we do that. So it says, she had wiggled free of her commitments when the phone rang. So here you can see my sentence begins with the subject, then I have the past form of have, which is had, and then I've got my participle form of the verb. Okay, that's going to be our pattern no matter what our subject is. So with every subject, you'll use had and the participle form of the verb. So what the sentence is saying is kind of like she got free, got away from maybe promises she had made, plans she had made, and then that particular action occurred before the action of the phone ringing. Okay. Now let's look at negative past perfect sentences. To do this, again, you start with the subject, you use had, then not, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. The baby hadn't wiggled for a while. Right? Now, if you've encountered any new parents, it could make someone very nervous, like, oh, why is the baby not moving, right? Could be just very soundly asleep, right? Now, let's look at making a yes or no question in the past perfect. To do this, you're going to start with had, then you'll have your subject, and then the participle form of the verb. Here's another example. Had the dog wiggled his way into that small hole before? Right? So here, maybe again, we're thinking those kind of short, small movements, rapid movements, maybe to get stuck in a particular place. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb wiggle. The first word we're going to discuss is just this noun form of the word. So the noun wiggle has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation. So, another way you might hear a medical professional ask, are you able to make these small movements? They might say, give your toes a wiggle, right? And again, they're looking for small movements, right? Is your ankle okay? Are you able to move your toes? Another word you might encounter is the noun wiggle room. The meaning here is a little bit different. This can refer to the capacity or the scope for negotiation, particularly if we're talking about changing something that had previously been stated or previously been decided. let's take a look at an example of that. Do we have any wiggle room with this line item in our budget? Right? So budget is a financial plan, right? We plan to spend this amount of money in this category or with this kind of expense and so forth. Here someone's kind of asking, could we maybe change this, right? Could we? Many times it's asking where people are asking for more, right? They're not asking to decrease, but it may happen. So that's what's meant by that capacity or scope to make a change. One last word for us today. It's the adjective wiggly. Here we're describing movement that's, again, made in sort of a twisting. For some people, it helps them think of a snake-like or worm-like fashion. So, an example of this in a sentence. The wiggly preschoolers haven't been sitting still all afternoon. Right? I have so much respect for teachers who work with really small children like preschoolers and kindergartners. And some days, right? And this can happen to adults too, where you just really struggle to sit still, right? So they've got this gotta keep moving kind of energy. Thanks again to Artem for suggesting today's video, and I thank you all for watching. Have a great day.